Welcome to the Giants Huddle podcast brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the New York Giants. The Giants will play their second divisional game of the season this Sunday when they host the 3-3 Washington Commanders. They lost their first NFC East battle in Week 1 to the Dallas Cowboys. To help set the stage for this Week 7 matchup, I'm now joined by one member of the CBS broadcast team that will be calling the game alongside Matt Ryan and Tiki Barber, none other than play-by-play announcer Andrew Catalon. Andrew, you got Lance Medow here on Giants.com. Greatly appreciate the time. Hope all is well. How's everything on your end?
Things are great, Lance. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure having you on the program. And let's delve right into this matchup, Andrew, because first of all, for our audience to understand, this is your third go-around with Washington this season. You saw them in Week 3 against the Buffalo Bills. You saw them last week against the Atlanta Falcons. And now, obviously, you'll see them against the New York Giants. And it's interesting because I would argue you saw probably their roughest performance against Buffalo, and then Sam Howell and company's best performance against Atlanta. So from your viewpoint, where does Washington lie? Is it somewhere in between, or is it somewhere near both of those outside spectrums?
Yeah, I think, Lance, it's a great point. I think a lot of it's because you have a young quarterback. I think that's kind of sometimes the wave that you ride when you got a guy who's only made a handful of starts. I think there's a lot of potential for Sam Howell. I think he has no fear. He can sling it. He's aggressive. But at the same time, he takes a lot of sacks, and those sacks have killed drives for Washington. He didn't do that last week against Atlanta. He was still sacked, but they were able to put some short drives together and get in the end zone. The Buffalo game was a mess, 4 interceptions. So I think there's a lot to like about this Washington team, but you're going to have that inconsistency when you have a young player and some younger players on defense as well.
You mentioned the sacks, 34 sacks. That's the most in the NFL. I'm curious, Andrew, when you look at sacks and you take into consideration a mobile quarterback, as you well know, mobile quarterbacks tend to take a lot of sacks because they try to extend plays. And the more you extend the play, the more likely the offensive linemen are not going to be able to block. So from what you've seen, is it him holding onto the ball too long? Or is it him actually trying to extend plays and make something out of nothing, essentially?
Yeah, I think when you ask the coaching staff of Washington, they'll say it's about a 50-50 split. Some are on the offensive line, but a lot of them are on Howell. And I think that he is aware of that. He has said, I need to find incompletions. That's his new thing, that if the pressure is coming, just throw it to the ground. I think you'll probably see that if the Giants can get some pressure on Sunday. But at the same time, he's learning that he can't do the things that he did when he was in college. He likes to take off and run, but he's taken some big hits. And he has said the last couple of weeks, I know I have to get down. I have to slide. I can't take these hits all the time. A lot of what Daniel Jones has gone through with the Giants. So he's an emerging quarterback. He's learning on the fly. I think that he can be the guy in Washington for years to come, but he's going to take some growing pains, and we've seen that this season.
I think what also has jumped out to me, Andrew, is the fact that you have 5 players with at least 130 receiving yards on Washington. So normally sometimes a young quarterback will hone in on one guy and he'll lean on maybe a Terry McLaurin. But it seems to me that he's really spreading the wealth. There's been games where Curtis Samuel's done the heavy lifting, tight end Logan Thomas. How much does that make this Washington offense a bit more dangerous than maybe others where they lean particularly on one number one guy?
Yeah, I think Eric Bieniemy is doing a really good job in Washington, their offensive coordinator. And that's just it, Lance. You don't know where the ball's going to on any given play. Last week in the first quarter, they seemed to force feed McLaurin, tried to make it a point that we're going to get him the ball. And they did. He had a season high in targets. But Jahan Dotson is a guy that a lot of people in Washington are saying, hey, he was a first-round pick last year. Where's he been? At any point, he can take the top off of defense. De'Ami Brown can get down the field. And Logan Thomas was kind of the forgotten man last week, but he's also had big games this season. So, the big thing for me is Brian Robinson. They don't run the ball a lot. They pass it the third most of any team in the NFL. But they're using Robinson in screens, the short passing game, and he's a much improved pass catcher this year. He took a screen into the end zone last week against Atlanta. So there's a lot of different parts of this offense that can beat you, and that's what the Giants are going to have to focus in on. It's not just one guy. There's a lot of guys that can make plays.
You're ready for a change. Payday comes early with Citizens, so go to that retreat. New you moves to the country. Now you're raising goats and launching a lifestyle brand. Are you ready for all that life brings?
Andrew, you brought up Eric Bieniemy, and clearly whenever there's a new offensive coordinator that comes in, the big talk of the town is what type of an influence will they have on the scheme? And we know all of his years associated with Kansas City. I guess what has jumped out to you the most, outside of what we're talking about, him spreading the wealth, the creativeness that we know the Chiefs were known for in terms of mixing and matching personnel? How much has Washington implemented that, or is it more of a wait and see approach because they have a much younger quarterback in comparison, of course, to Patrick Mahomes?
Well, I'll tell you this, because before the Buffalo game in September, we went and watched their practice on a Friday in Virginia, and you can feel Eric Bieniemy at practice. He's the loudest guy on the field. And Ron Rivera has said that Eric Bieniemy has kind of taken that assistant head coach role and really made the most of it. Bieniemy is the guy that made the practice schedules in the spring and summer, and now he is making the practice schedule, here in the fall as these games have begun. And Ron Rivera thinks that the way that Bieniemy runs a practice has made his team well conditioned. They're in the best shape they've ever been in under Ron Rivera. So I think Bieniemy's impact on the field, X's and O's, is something that's still evolving. But his impact off the field, with his voice, with his demeanor, with his presence, I think has made a big influence on this Washington, not just offense, but entire team. He's a guy you feel when you're at practice. And I think that's kind of spilling over confidence-wise with some of the players on this team.
Giants fans, I just watched this great new series with Eli Manning, Champion the Journey, presented by Citizens. Eli talks with Tracy Wolfson about life after the Giants and everything he's working on now, like broadcasting and his business endeavors. You can check out the series now at citizensbank.com/champion the journey. As we were talking with Andrew Catalon, Matt Ryan, and Tiki Barber will have the call NFL on CBS this Sunday as the Giants host the Washington Commanders. You were talking about the influence of Eric Bieniemy, Andrew, and last season we were looking at the Giants through a similar lens in terms of the influence of Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka. And unfortunately, the results haven't been able to pick up where they left off last season. From your outside perspective, what's been more surprising to you? The Giants' offensive struggles or the level of impact that Sam Howell has had on the 3-3 Washington Commanders start?
Yeah, I look at this Giants team, and I do the Bills preseason game. So I was around Daboll and Joe Shane for a while before they came to New York, and I think the world of both of them. I think they're the right guys for the job. I see a lot of crazy things, but this offensive line situation is just a nightmare. And, they're battling through. They're trying to get healthy. We know the Justin Pugh story is great, but that revolving door up front, I think, has made it really hard on the Giants to find any type of rhythm. So if you're asking me what am I more surprised by, I'm more surprised by the Giants, but I think I put an asterisk next to that, Lance, just because of the offensive line play. And I know everyone goes through injuries, and I know it exists for every team, but I think it's really hard to find a rhythm when you've got no continuity up front. And that, let's face it, the Giants have not had continuity up front this year. 5 different offensive line combinations. We saw Pugh last week moving after 9 snaps over to left tackle. I think if the Giants could get some healthy guys up front and can kind of get the quarterback healthy as well, that I think they still have time to make some noise this season. But I know they're running out of time, and I do think this game against Washington is absolutely pivotal for the Giants.
Especially, of course, since it's within the division. It's interesting, Andrew, you brought up the Giants' offensive line. I would argue maybe both teams somewhat mirror images on the offensive line. And I know Washington hasn't been nearly as banged up. That's not my point, but Washington brought in Nick Gates, and they were trying to revamp their interior. They brought in Andrew Wiley from the Chiefs, who has the connection to Eric Bieniemy. When we look at the 34 sacks, and then you look at the Giants' 33 sacks, I mean, the numbers are similar. The movable parts are somewhat similar. How much do you think the offensive line has really defined both of these teams, to a certain degree at least?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think for Washington, a lot of it is in the trenches on both sides of the ball, because we know about their 4 first-round picks up front on the defensive side. And while the numbers are there, they're not dominating guys like I think you would expect. But I think that can come at any time. And that's why I think that's a big matchup in this game. The Giants' offensive line against the front 4 of Washington, and how the Giants protect against the Chase Young and Jonathan Allen and a Montez Sweat and a Daron Payne, assuming all those guys are healthy, because Sweat and Payne got a little nicked up in the game last Sunday in Atlanta. But I do think you're right. I think a lot of it's up front. I think that the Giants are going to go if they can get this line going. I think they'll make some noise. And I think Washington, if they can cut down on the sacks with Sam Howell continuing to gain confidence, that they can make some noise as well. And I'm intrigued by this matchup. I think it's going to be a good one on Sunday.
I think what also makes it intriguing, Andrew, is the fact that you could argue perhaps both defenses are coming off their best performances, especially with what Washington did against Atlanta. They had the 3 takeaways, and the Giants, for all of their offensive issues that we're talking about, they did keep that Bills offense in check. And I know Buffalo has had back-to-back sluggish games going back to Jacksonville, but how encouraging do you think that is, at least maybe for the Giants' perspective, that the defense has maybe started to turn the corner a bit?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, look, I grew up in New Jersey, so the Giants were the team that I watched every single Sunday. And it's been a while since they've had a linebacker that played like Bobby Okereke played last week on Sunday night. I thought he was fantastic. He was all over the place, and that's what you want out of a guy that you gave a lot of money to. And I think that's a really encouraging sign for the Giants. And you said it, the Bills offense, I saw them score 37 in Washington. I mean, they can put up points. The Giants did a great job on Sunday night defensively. And I'll tip my cap to Washington as well, because they've had some rough goes with Jack Del Rio, but he had a new plan against Atlanta. And I know the quarterback's in his second year with the Falcons and Ritter, and he's still growing, but they had a much better plan on Sunday. That was one of their better defensive efforts. They needed it. They were embarrassed on Thursday night against the Bears a couple of weeks ago, giving up 40 points. They bounced back in a big way, and I think there's a lot for Washington to build on defensively going into this one as well.
And on the topic of the defense, and this is where I think your insight comes into play, Emmanuel Forbes, who the Commanders took in the first round, was a prevalent part of their defense. And then all of a sudden, no snaps in this past game. And the Giants, of course, invested in a young corner in Deonte Banks, who has certainly shown some positive flashes. What was the rationale, Andrew, as to why Forbes has so quickly been taken out of the equation? And is that something you anticipate moving forward they're going to do again, given how, once again, what we're talking about, the defense held up pretty nicely against Atlanta?
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, Forbes, a first-round pick. And look, I told you I went to practice last month. He's got a very thin frame. And I know he held up in the SEC, but he's a thin guy. And he had trouble tackling. He had a tough time against A.J. Brown and the Eagles. And then against the Bears, he got off to a bad start, and they made the decision to bench him. And he didn't play one defensive snap last Sunday in Atlanta. And they want him to watch for a little bit and kind of reset. And you're right, they played well in that secondary without him. So maybe he's going to watch a little bit more against the Giants. And, Ron Rivera said all the right things. They still believe in him. They're not giving up on him. But they feel like he needs a little time to kind of watch for a while. So I wouldn't expect to see too much, if any, of him again on Sunday. That's just my personal opinion.
Well, speaking of the secondary, I think one of the things the Giants are looking to ignite is clearly the passing attack. You could say scoring overall, given the fact that the Giants are averaging just under 12 points a game. And this was the reason why they brought in Tyrod Taylor, Andrew, in comparison to 2 years ago, if you recall, when Daniel Jones went down with a neck injury. It was Jake Fromm and Mike Glennon. Unfortunately, the results were not very encouraging. And Taylor's coming off a performance against the Bills where we know he's pretty much followed the script, protecting the football, making good decisions, trying to do something to create the offense. I guess what I'm getting at is, from what you've seen on the back end of this Washington defense outside of their last game against the Falcons, are there plays to be made for the Giants passing attack? Or do you think the performance against Atlanta was more of what we're going to see now moving forward for this Washington back end?
Yeah, Lance, I think that Washington will have more confidence defensively, but there's absolutely plays to be made. I mean, look at the numbers. I mean, they've had some rough games, this Washington defense this year. And I think they made some minor adjustments and corrections, but, Atlanta did not play a clean game last week. They made some mistakes more than Washington forced them into mistakes. And again, that's taking nothing away from the game plan Jack Del Rio put together. I thought it was a good game plan, and they played better than they had the last few weeks. But from a Giants perspective, there's absolutely plays to be made. I think that the Giants, it sounds like they're going to use Jalen Hyatt a lot more, maybe use some speed down the field, try to take the top off the defense. I think the Giants have a chance here to score some points and get in the end zone, which is not something we've seen a lot of lately with New York.
You love turf. You're good at it. So you start a turf biz. Business grows, your savings grow. Become the most celebrated name in turf. Are you ready for all that life brings?
Hey, Giants fans, Citizens is presenting a new video series, Champion the Journey, where Eli Manning talks with Tracy Wolfson about how his elite quarterbacking skills helped make him ready to succeed in his post-football career. Watch the series now at citizensbank.com/champion, the journey. Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. As we're talking with Andrew Catalon, he'll be on the call. NFL on CBS with Matt Ryan and Tiki Barber this Sunday as the Giants and the Commanders will renew their rivalry. As far as the Commanders' offense is concerned, 9 touchdowns and 2 interceptions for Sam Howell in the other 5 games outside of Buffalo. When it comes down to the NFL, we know scoring points is stating the obvious. When you look at both of these teams, Andrew, how simple is it to say that Washington has had a few performances where they've been able to get in the mid-20s to the 30s, and the Giants haven't, and regardless how both defenses are playing, that really has been what has separated both of these teams thus far.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think a lot of credit goes to Bieniemy, and Sam Howell is a confident young man. He's a coach's son. There's not a lot that he sees that scares him or intimidates him. I think that this kid has a lot of moxie and poise, and I think that works well with Bieniemy and his personality and just who the Washington Commanders want to be on offense. They are building an identity. And it revolves around Sam Howell not being scared, not backing down, and making some big throws. So, yeah, you look at their season so far, they were down 21-3 week 2 in Denver in the second quarter, came back and won that game. I mean, their offense took them all the way back in the second half. And, they took the Eagles to overtime. They played well in that game. They had a few things late in the game. They could have gone for 2 and gone for the win. They didn't do it. So I think that this is a team that is learning as they go, but are certainly capable of scoring a lot of points.
Andrew, as a big picture perspective, in terms of the NFC East, last season, you look at this division and you had 3 teams make the playoffs. And a lot of people, they come back the following year, they say, okay, well, everybody's just going to build upon what happened last season. The NFL just doesn't work like that. We've seen Dallas and Philadelphia hold up for the most part. The Giants have had their fair share of issues, and Washington maybe sitting in the middle. Has anything taken you by surprise overall in the NFC East in terms of your lens from looking at the league overall?
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised the Giants are 1-5, and we talked about that a little bit. But, I also think that you're seeing that there's not a dominant team out there. And I think you just look to the Meadowlands last week with the Jets and Eagles. I mean, Philly looked pedestrian in that game, and you don't take nothing away from the Jets and the way their defense is capable of playing. But, I think that going into that game, most people probably would have thought Philly would come out on top and remain undefeated. And I think that just shows you around the league that it's so hard to win in this league. I mean, people that pick games, or you look at, this team should win or they shouldn't win. Nobody knows. I just feel like in a season like this, anything can happen. We've seen upsets. You're going to continue to see them. I don't even think there's such thing as an upset anymore with the way these teams are so evenly matched. So am I surprised the Giants are 1-5? Yes. But am I overall surprised about anything in the NFC East? No. I think it's going to be a dogfight to the end, as it usually is in this division.
Yeah, I mean, these divisional games usually come down to the final possession, and most games do. To your point. That's why I wouldn't necessarily expect anything different. But before I let you go, with respect to the Giants, you mentioned there still may be some time for things to turn around. I mean, look at the Lions last year, Andrew. They started 1-6. They went 8-2 in their final 10. They ultimately did miss the playoffs. And I think at this point, the Giants, you just need that one game to maybe change the conversation. But if it's going to come from any facet of this team, is the onus, in your opinion, more on the offense right now for the Giants, given the fact that they have struggled to score points? Or is it more from what you were talking about earlier, Bobby Okereke, the opportunistic plays in the defense to really shift the conversation about this team here?
I think it's the offense. I think the defense is going to be okay. They got to score some points. They got to figure it out. I think, as we said, a lot of it's on the offensive line. Whether Daniel Jones or Tyrod Taylor, we'll see, which is the guy for the foreseeable future. But there's no doubt that they've got to get something going offensively. They've got to They've got to put points on the board and stop digging out of holes, because when you're down, you call the game differently. You can't establish the run as much. And that's where they have a strength with Saquon. So I think the Giants, if they can get out to a lead and start playing ahead instead of behind, it would really change a lot of things.
100%, especially since, believe it or not, the Giants are still looking for their first offensive touchdown in the first half this season. The lone touchdown, of course, coming thanks to Jason Pinnock, his pick 6 against the Miami Dolphins. He is Andrew Catalon. He'll be on the call, the play-by-play announcer, alongside Matt Ryan and Tiki Barber. It's the NFL on CBS. Giants Commanders, 1 p.m. Eastern kickoff on Sunday. Andrew, can't thank you enough. Greatly appreciate the time and the insight. Have a great call, and I look forward to talking down the road.
Yeah, same here. Thanks, Lance.
Absolutely. My pleasure. This is the latest edition of the Giants Huddle podcast. You can catch it on Giants.com, the mobile app, and your favorite podcast platforms.